Next up, let's talk about loops in JSX. So it's really common to need to iterate or loop inside of our JSX. Just a couple of examples. If we had a shopping list or a shopping cart that we were creating, a shopping cart component, we would want to loop over all of the items, all of the products, the foods, whatever, and display them somehow. Maybe something as simple as making an LI for each one, or maybe we have a item component, a shopping cart item component, and we want to render one per each item. Same thing here, GitHub repositories, we could loop over them and display each one. Maybe we have a repo preview component, or maybe we're just making an LI. Songs in an album. If we were cloning Instagram, we would have a bunch of photos we'd loop over. Or on Twitter, we'd have a bunch of tweets. You can see where I'm going. It's really common. But before we see some different options for looping, you should understand how React will treat an array. So if we tried to render an array, we have this random choice. This is a component where we have props.choices. It's being used, where are you? Right here. We're picking, no, which one is it? There we go. Random choice is yellow. So we passed in an array of choices. I think it was red, yellow, and green. So props.choices is an array. And if I just render that array, I'm probably going to undo this in a moment, but if I just start by rendering that array, let's make a div so that we can hold everything together in one parent. And then in this div, I'm just going to render right here, maybe in a paragraph tag, props.choices. So that's an array. Once again, let's see what happens when I render an array directly into JSX. Refresh the page. This is what I get. Red, green, yellow, no spaces, no commas, nothing, no quotes, just that content shoved together. So what this tells us is that when we have an array that we're trying to render using JSX, it's going to iterate over that array and just insert each piece directly into the DOM. And that may not be very useful if we have strings, but if we have an array of components or an array of JSX elements, that can be very useful. So let me demonstrate that. We'll get rid of that, refresh, go back to what we had before. Now let's make a new component. Let's go with to-do list.js. And in our to-do list component, we will have some props. And we're going to return, maybe we'll do a div. And then in that div, we'll have an h4 that says to-do list. And then down below, we'll have a UL. And in this UL, we'll have a bunch of to-dos. And we'll start by just hard coding those to-dos. It will be an array, but an array of LIs. So the first LI will be, I don't know, walk chickens. And then the second one will be, what should we do? How about feed chickens? And the third one will be eat chickens. So now we have an array where instead of text like red, green, and yellow, we have actual elements, JSX elements. And if I render that right here, to-dos, let's see what happens. Well, I got to make sure I'm actually rendering a to-do list. We'll do that at the bottom, to-do list. And I need to make sure I include to-do list in index.html. We're getting a lot of different pieces here. To-do list.js, refresh the page, scroll down, and there we go. React or JSX is going to actually render each element in that array just directly in the DOM. So we have a wrapping UL, and then inside of that, we're rendering this array. And JSX is going to iterate over every single element in that array and just put it right here. So that's really important to understand. When you render an array, it's going to be iterated over. Each element will be inserted into the DOM. It's not going to just render an array like putting, array braces here and writing the contents to the DOM. It's actually going to loop and insert each element. And that's crucial to understand because the way that we typically loop, at least in JSX, is by using map. Map, the array method. Map returns an array. It's an array method, but it also returns an array. And we commonly use this to take some data and map it into something like an LI. And then map will take each LI and store it in an array, and then we render that array here. So let's rewrite this. Instead of hard coding our to-dos, let's pass them in as props. So in app.js, we'll pass in to-dos as an array. I need my curly braces. It's not a string. And then we'll have walk chickens, feed chickens, eat chickens. Okay, so now I just passed in one array with 3 elements into to-do list under the prop name of to-dos. So over here in my component, I should have access to props.todos. And I could use a for loop if I really wanted to. I could make some array. We'll call this to-dos, have it be an empty array, and then for let t of props.todos. I can push into my to-dos array, this empty array, to-dos.push, and then I can push in an li if that's all I want. And in that li, I can add in t, which is the text for each to-do. That should make me an array of to-dos, and then I can render it right there. This is not really the React way, but it does work. We're making an array. We're pushing one item at a time in that array, and then we're rendering that entire array. Refresh my page, scroll down, same outcome. Walk chickens, feed chickens, eat chickens. The more React-y way of doing this is using map. So this is what you'll see all the time. Just like I said with a ternary operator, you'll see that all the time for conditionals. You'll see map everywhere in React. So map just makes us an array. We can do the exact same thing, but we can actually do it in line. So here we would do props.todos.map. And then map is going to take a callback function. So for each t, each to-do, we will return an li with that t, the text rendered right there. So this is shorter, and it's just more React-y. Now it can be a little bit intimidating when you're starting out because you do write a lot of arrow functions, and you have a lot of curly braces going on and parentheses embedded, but it's just how it's most frequently done. So props.todos.map, and then our callback in there. So if we take a look over here, refresh the page, and it's working once again. And in this case, it's a very simple return value from this arrow function. It's just an li. It fits nicely on one line, so we can use the implicit return. But just like with this arrow function here, if I really wanted to, I could put this on multiple lines, something like this here, and then explicitly return that li. So this is valid. I'll refresh, it still works, but it's kind of uglier. We often make use of the implicit return in React, so we can keep our markup cleaner. The JSX will be compact, it will be shorter, but we often have things that do take up more than one line. So what we can do instead is still use the implicit return, just like we're using in some of our other components. App right here is returning one thing. It's just a very large thing. It's just a div though. And we don't have to use a return keyword, but we do need those parentheses. So if I wanted to return something, how about an li that had a bold tag inside of it, or maybe a checkbox or something, and I wanted that to be on multiple lines, just so I wasn't writing a bunch of stuff on this one long line, I can add parentheses here, and then I can indent that. Let's close this there, add my closing parenthesis like that. So now I have my parentheses, and then I can decide what I actually want to render. Maybe I'll do an li, and then inside of that, we'll have a bold tag, and this t, the actual text of the to-do will go in there. And then let's also maybe put a checkbox. So we'll have input type equals checkbox. Okay, so we're still just mapping over props.todos. We're still using the implicit return. I'm not using the return keyword, but because we're on multiple lines, I wrap it in parentheses. If we refresh the page, there we go. We now have our to-dos in bold, and we have checkboxes. Now those checkboxes don't do anything. We haven't talked about events, so don't worry about that. I just wanted to demonstrate that we could have multiple lines of content that we render per each element or per each thing in the to-dos array. So here's another example in the slides. It is a jokes loop component. So we have jokes, they're just hard-coded here. How do you comfort a JavaScript bug? You console/console it. It's very, very funny. Why did the developer quit? Because he didn't get a raise. Hilarious. So we loop over them in this one using a for loop, like I showed you earlier. It does work, it's just not very React-y. Here's the same thing rewritten using map. So we write it directly inline inside of our templates or inside of the JSX that we return. Most commonly with an implicit return. It fits on one line, so just put it in there. We don't need to use parentheses if we don't want to. but if we do have a multi-line return value inside of that map callback, we use parens. So why is map better? Well, the short answer is just that you'll see it all the time. It's the Reacty way. Eventually, we'll talk about this concept of pure functions and not mutating state in React. And there's just kind of a thing in React where we use a lot of array methods, including map. And so we highly, highly recommend you use map, even though you might feel more comfortable using a for loop or a for of. We definitely recommend you use map. Aside from the fact that it's most commonly used, with map, you know that your code is always going to run on each element in the right order. You know that the original array will be completely unaffected. Map does not alter or mutate the original array. It makes a new array every single time. And that's actually a very important concept in React. We'll get into it later on. So at the end of the day, you'll see map everywhere. It's what we recommend you use. Use it directly inside of your template if you want to. You can also map outside of it and then save it to a variable and render that value, just like we did with some of our other conditional examples, but it's pretty common to see it done right inside of the JSX markup. Next up, we're going to talk about this error or this warning we've been getting in the console. I don't know if you've seen it yet. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. So we'll solve that in the next video. Okay,